Indira Gandhi National Open University presents a program titled Increase in Population, Where Are We Heading? By the School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies. Let's listen to the program.
Welcome, learners and listeners. We have invited in the studio Dr. B. Rupini sir and Dr. Diksha Dave. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
Let me start with you, Dr. Diksha. What is the current status of population growth of world?
See, actually, it has been a long-term discussion, population growth and its effects. And we very well know how population increases, what has been the situation. But very surprising, the trend is that we are living in a demographically divided. Because when I say population growth, it doesn't happen evenly in all the countries of the world. Some countries are worried because of the shrinking numbers. The population is declining in some of the countries, for example, Japan. And there are certain Asian and African countries, the less developing ones, where the population is increasing. So if you ask me what is the current scenario, is that there is a huge demographic differences occurring across the nations in the world. Then the growth rate is 1.1% per year, the population is increasing. And it is estimated that by 2050, almost 27 countries of the world will be doubling their population by that time. So that really raises an alarm button that population is increasing. And if you look at the indicators, there is the birth rate, that is the fertility rate, the death rate. All these are responsible for increasing population. But as of now, it has been felt that improvement in the medical facilities and decreasing the death rate, that has actually been responsible for the rise in population. So this is how, we divide the world according to the population, and how different countries, they are adopting different measures to take care of this population problem. There is not the population bomb kind of a situation. This is a myth that population bomb, population is increasing. It is in fact not. It is increasing not because of the birth rate increase. Birth rates have started declining after 1980s. If we look the scenario of India also, at the time of independence, there was 6 children per woman, which has now come down to 3. Average life expectancy at that time was 40 years. Today it is above 65 years. So it is not that we have not made any progress. Yes, we have made so much of improvements, and population bomb kind of a scary situation is not happening.
How fast is the population increasing today compared to the increase we have seen in the past?
The population has not increased uniformly. There have been stages. There have been stage 1. That was a time when the birth rate was high. The birth rate was high because infant mortality rate was high. People tend to have more children because they believe that there will be more hands to earn.
Yes.
And at that time, during this stage 1, the death rate was also high. And at that time, there was no population growth, in that sense that birth rate was high and the death rate was also. Then came stage 2. And in that stage, the birth rate was high. But we checked the death rate. We started controlling the diseases, and at that time the population started expanding. Now you can understand, less number of people dying and more number of children are born. So that leads to expand in population. Then comes stage 3, where the birth rate is declining. There is a social change. People start realizing that having a small family is good for their economic development. Women becoming independent, they started working outside. So that gives a sharp decline in the birth rate. And automatically the death rate is also declining. So the situation, the birth rate is lowering down, the death rate is lowering down, consequently the population is slowing down. And the last stage, if we say, that is actually the post-industrialization, where the death rate is slow, but again the birth rate is also becoming low. So that again will lead to have a kind of a declining population. You asked me that how it grew in the past and how it grew in the present. In the past, we were more worried about increasing the number of children. But today, what we are bearing is that there had been a population increase, and today we are what we call it as a demographic disaster kind of a situation.
Dr. Rupini, I have a question for you. And how do you believe that overpopulation is affecting the world in both developed and non-developed countries? Do you think it is different for developed countries and non-developed countries?
To begin with, first we have to understand some concepts, so that there is a tremendous disparities among nations regarding the overpopulation. For example, people in rich as well as the poor countries live in separate worlds completely and isolated by radically different economic as well as the demographic conditions, what she discussed so far. So human overpopulation, it is there, and then most pressing environmental issues are also surrounded. Silently, it is aggravating this overpopulation. The forces behind the global warming and environmental pollution and habitat loss, the sixth month extinction and intensive farming practices, and the consumption of finite natural resources. So these are the most important thing, the consequences of the overpopulation. First, we have to understand that the World Bank divides the countries of the world into three main economic categories on the basis of average per capita gross national income. So on the basis of that, first category is high income countries, that is highly developed industrialized nations, example US, Canada, Japan, like this. And the second category is middle income or moderately developed countries. For example, Latin America, and then Northern and then Southern Africa. All these comes under the middle income countries. And the third category is low income, that is the developing countries. That is the Eastern, Western, Central Africa. Then India. Our country is also lying in that low income developing country. The high income nations are generally called as developed countries, and then whereas middle and then low income countries grouped together as developing countries. If we observe the distribution of wealth, if we will compare this population scenario among the countries, it is a mind-boggling situation if we'll see the wealth. So for example, the high income countries make up just 15% of the world's population. They control about 80% of the world's wealth, and then calculated on the basis of gross national income. That is a criteria to calculate. And the low income developing countries with 37% of the world's population control only 3% of the world's gross national income. So this amounts to a difference in per capita income of 63:1. That is a ratio. With over 7 billion people living on the planet today, estimates that reaching between 8 to 11 billion by 2050 and then up to 15 billion by 2100. Just imagine, the human population will continue to grow exponentially, and almost all this growth will take place in developing countries, where today it is 5.3 billion population of less developed regions is expected to increase to 7.8 by 2050. So for example, more than 98% of world population growth is occurring in the developing countries only, not in developed countries. They are very, very talented. They are very clever. So in fact, population growth is highest in the least developed countries. So the reason being is what Dr. Diksha already discussed. There is a medical advancements,
Yes,
and increases in the agricultural productivity, and poverty, lack of education and family planning are the main reasons. So there has been a decline in mortality rates and rise in birth rates, largely due to the medical advancements. So which have provided more effective ways to control epidemics. So better measures to treat critical health ailments. So all this matters a lot. And advancement in medicine also led to increase in the average life expectancy of humans, and good parental care, health care, education and developmental programs by the government. They improved the chances of survival for the both mother as well as the child also. So these are the some of the criteria. And there are also social pressures, mostly from families to have children. Increased early marriages, hands-on earning will be more.
lot of social taboos, there in the country.
They more or less look like the reasons for the population growth,
Yes.
along with being a criteria for the same. Dr. Rupini, what do you think will be the consequences of population growth?
Because population is growing and the natural resources are depleting. So main consequences just I would like to list out for the learners. That is a loss of fresh water and the species extinction, so which we are depending upon them, and then lower life expectancy in the fastest growing countries especially, and depleting of natural resources because we have the renewable as well as the non-renewable resources are there, and increased emergence of new epidemics as well as pandemics, and less freedom to use that, and more restrictions obviously because increasing with the population, and increased global warming as well as the climate change, and finally I can say that more intensive farming practices. So these are the main consequences of the population growth.
You just mentioned lower life expectancy.
Yeah.
How will that be? We have the advanced medical technology. Even then we will have a lower life expectancy?
The life expectancy is not that. The people are dying because of so many chemicals and hazards which are persisting in the environment. So that is in the stages when I explained the stage 4. It is actually when we will advance, when we will industrialize, the death rate will again increase. That is the situation which we are foreseeing.
Right.
That there will come a situation, birth rate is low because people want small families, and death rate is again more. because people dying because of, disasters are happening every day. The environmental disasters are occurring.
Yes.
So this is how it is.
There is an exploitation of natural resources happening, and hence, of course, there will be disaster-like situation in the future. Dr. Rupini, please tell us, how is overpopulation related to the environment?
So, to understand this relationship between the population as well as the environment, it is very complex, first of all. And then human societies, what we are living in now, impacts on the environment are the functions of three major interconnected criteria. That is the population size, affluence or consumption, what we are naturally doing, and then technology. There are two major forms of environmental impacts on the society. The first, if we will consume resources such as, for example, land, food, water, soil, that is every day we are doing that. And services from healthy ecosystems such as the water filtration through wetlands, and overconsumption as well as uses of all these natural resources depletes the supplies of non-renewable resources. For example, if we are talking about the non-renewable resources, we have to talk about the fossil fuels. And the depletes renewable resources such as the fisheries and forests. If we use them up faster, then they can replenish themselves. So that is first one. And the second, if we emit waste, because using the technology, waste as a product of our consumption activities. If technology is more, and then generation of waste is also more, including air, then water pollutants, toxic materials, greenhouse gases, and excess of nutrients also. And some waste, for example, untreated sewage. Every day we are seeing in the newspapers, untreated sewage, they are lying in the roads and in the residential areas, and in many pollutants threatens the human health also. Other disrupt the natural ecosystem functions. For example, if we'll see that excess of nitrogen in water supplies causes the algal blooms in the fresh water that deplete the oxygen in the fresh water, as well as it kills the fish, that is, are the aquatic animals. So large societies consume more resources than the smaller ones. But consumption patterns as well as the technology choices may account for more environmental harms than the sheer number of the people. If, for example, if developed countries, we will take up the example of the US. The United States population is about 1/4 as large as that of China or India. But the United States currently uses far more energy because Americans are more affluent and use their wealth to buy energy intensive goods because they have the wealth. The developed country, they have the higher number of cars and higher number of electronic goods they are using regularly. And China and India are growing and becoming more affluent, so their environmental impacts will increase because of both population size as well as the consumption levels. So, for example, China surpassed this United States as the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide. Recently, we have seen in the newspapers. So, these are some of the facts we can see that.
Dr. Deeksha, apart from environmental impact, what are the other effects of population growth?
Dr. Rupini has rightly explained what could be the environmental effects, because we draw resources from nature and so on. But population has also lot many socio-economic impacts. When we grow in number, and as she has rightly said, the resources are finite. We are dependent upon the same resources for water, for living, for food, and so many other things. Firstly, it is that if it is highly growing population, it reduces the rate of capital formation. When the population is high, the dependents are high. They are more in number. The elderly are more in number. The children are more in number. So if the dependents are more in number, naturally we have to make more and more investment. We have to make investment for education. We also have to look for the elderly. We have to have social health insurance. We have to have some policy, something for the aged people. So in that case, what is happening is there are less rate of capital formation is taking place. And that is directly proportional to the development. Second, we very well know the problem of unemployment. We are not able to fully utilize the manpower that we have in our country. Population is a human resource. It is for us to use it. You can convert that resource into asset or a liability. So skilled manpower is very essential to overcome, because there is unemployment in various forms. There is underemployment. There is disguised unemployment. The seasonal unemployment. So that is actually not making full use of the capacity of the resource that we have. Very interesting relationship between poverty and the population. We believe that poor people tend to have more children because for them, children mean more hands to earn.
Yes.
And it is also true that if you have more children, you will remain poor.
Yeah.
Because from where you will obtain the resources to feed them, to educate them, to properly give them medical facilities, nutritious food, all this requires that is always possible whenever we have a small family.
Yes.
So these are some of the impacts which are very essential for us to understand that apart from the environment, the socio-economic impacts are also very much. Society mein why the crime rate is increasing, why the social infrastructure, why the roads are congested, why there is always a kind of a chaos, why we don't, our countries and our cities, why doesn't they look like the countries which are in Europe and other things? Because there is always a struggle. We are always struggling for space and for other things. This is actually because the sheer rise in the numbers that what we are having.
True.
The standard of living is low. For fresh water also we have to struggle. There is no fresh water, fresh air pollution is so much increasing. If you go and see the slums, how people are living. So that is a very pathetic situation. So we also need to look at these factors, that how we can address these issues of population.
How population characteristics and natural resource exploitation are related to each other?
If you look at the natural resources, resources are tangible, non-tangible, these kind of resources are there. And population resources are very much limited. For example, you take the simple thing that is the food which we eat. Food access and availability, both of things are directly related to the population. People living without food, people are eating the, undernourished. So this is one aspect. Accordingly, in poor villages, you find women walking long distances to get water.
Right.
That is also clearly indicates the scarcity of the resource that we have. So natural resources, because we are dependent on the resources, and natural resources and population are intricately linked to each other. As now we are discussing about, as Dr. Rupini rightly explained, about the relationship between affluence, technology and population, the impact that is had. As you utilize more and more resources from your surroundings in order to develop yourself, in order to improve your standard of living, you are depriving some other community of that resource. You will be surprised to know that 86% population of the world, food of the world, is consumed by 20% of the people. Similarly, if you look at the energy, 58% of the energy is consumed by 20% of the people. 85% of the water resources that are available, that is the fresh water, that is taken up by the 20% of the people. These are the resources, the energy, water, food, and this is the situation being there in the world.
So there is no efficient utilization of resources, while there is exploitation of natural resources. Dr. Rupini, why do you think that population matters for food security?
So food security is when all people at all times have physical, social and economic access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. Everybody is very conscious about healthy life nowadays, but food security is also almost the same as such. So most of the countries with the highest number of people are facing the food insecurity because of the high fertility rates as well as rapid population growth. This increases a challenge of adequately meeting nutritional needs. Higher population, food production is also high, but people are malnourished in developing countries. That's why we can say that, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, if African countries, if we will see that population growth rate in the world, it is very high when compared to the developed countries or developing countries are also. By 2050, we can say that fertility rates are also declining. That is a prediction. And the population of the region is also projected as more than double. So if we will see, the food production depends upon the croplands as well as the water supply. Human population is increasing and we are also going for the housing, and then we are cutting the forests. So which are some strain under all these natural resources are under strain as human population increases. Pressure on limited land resources as well as the driven in part of population growth and then also expansion of the cropland. And the second, globally the world is becoming more urban. The urbanization is also growing. So if it is a developing countries or the underdeveloped nations, poor families in urban areas are also there. They can spend up to 60% of their budget on food. And then low income combined with high prices to purchase the food also, it also increases their risk of the hunger as well as the malnutrition. For example, in Philippines, if we'll see that, recent research also shows that population growth is also there and also adversely affected the productivity of the municipal fisheries because they are the islands. So they have to mainly depend upon the marine animals. Their fisheries had previously provided up to 80% of the dietary proteins. And also now it is declining because of the growing of the human population. It is estimated that whatever the research studies shows, there is next 25 years if we can talk about. Land degradation may lead to the decline in the global food production up to 12%. And it obviously if it is declining by 12%, 30%, obviously there is a food prices are also increasing. How much percentage it is increasing? It is increasing 30%. So loss of vegetation occurs due to deforestation as well as the cutting of the trees and the beyond the permissible limits, we can say that. Unsustainable extraction of firewood and shifting of cultivation, and then encroachment of forest land as well as the forest fires, that is a natural disaster. If we can think in that grounds, the irrigated regions are exhausted, food security and product. So that means we have to depend on the rains only, rain-fed regions. If we can understand that the demand will have to met from unirrigated dry land areas, which will have the contribute at least 7% of the future food grain production. So all these are the predictions. For example, in our country, the rain-fed districts are going to play a crucial role in ensuring the food security. So this is the reasons India has targeted its green revolution too on these districts. If we will talk about the food security, we have to discuss about the policy considerations also. There are short-term, long-term as well as the some other considerations are there. If short-term solutions, if we will see that about the food security, that is the social protection programs, for example, food aid is there, and in emergencies as well as the long-term provision of supplies to those hardest hit by hunger, the people, those who are in the below poverty line. And midterm solutions, if we will consider that developing integrated development approaches by the government that could simultaneously address both population factors as well as the food sector. And if we will see the international level, that is the International Food Policy as well as the Research Institute, it is also suggested that the slower population growth could significantly lower malnutrition as well as the increased agricultural productivity. So once the agricultural productivity increases, obviously economic growth as well as the investment in health and the education is also increases. So an estimated 215 million women in the developing world want to avoid the giving the birth. So increasing access to voluntary family planning would also improve the women's as well as the children's health. So these are some of the factors mostly affected for the food security.
Dr. Deeksha, what impact does urbanization and migration have on women and children?
Yeah, urbanization and migration are very important phenomena which govern the social makeup of any society or any country. People move out from rural areas to urban areas in search of employment.
Right.
Okay. Basically, when men migrate to cities for working, women are left behind in the villages and they look after the whole family. So this is one aspect where women are living in their own places. The whole burden or the responsibility comes on their shoulders. Now, in that case also, they are not able to look after their children properly. Now, another situation comes when they also migrate along with their husbands. They are also coming to the city. Now, in that cities, there may be a positive or a negative situation. Sometimes, in the long run, it take a positive shape because in the urban areas, there are ample opportunities of education. But initially, when they migrate to urban areas, basically, they are left without jobs. They come because of some other pressures, because of the lands being taken up by the newly projects that are coming. Most of time, due to natural calamities also, their own land, their own fields, they are just left without this thing and they come to the urban areas. The situation becomes very bad for them because when they are here, they don't have any means of livelihood. They start compromising. They start accepting whatever petty jobs that they are getting. They get employed at different places. Most of the time it happens that they are exploited. If you look at the plight of the children, you find in streets the children are working in small hotels, dhabas, etc. They are not at the time of where they should be going to school and they should be receiving the education, they are working. Similarly, the case for women also. Because whenever urbanization occurs, it is actually to bad effects or the negative growth of women because they are already deprived. They don't have any, and crimes against women especially takes place in such situations only because they are they are homeless. They don't have any means of survival. They are ready to compromise. They are ready to work at whatever places they get some work. So this also needs to be taken care of because if we want our nation to progress, we also have to look for the sustainability of the rural livelihood. When we talk of urbanization, that is true that urban areas are centers of growth. They have good opportunities. But along with this, if we want a rural population to abruptly come to the urban areas and settle themselves down, that is also not a good sign for sustainable development. Because unless and until we promote the sustainable livelihoods, whatever the livelihood they are having in their own places, whether it is a small agriculture or whether some sort of a small scale industry where they are employed or some sort of handicraft, whatever they are doing, they are leaving that and coming to the urban areas in search of some better jobs. So in my views, urbanization and migration can be positive if done in a proper calculative manner. If you are able to provide them good job, if you are able to give them space for living, shelter is most important thing. Then urbanization, then this growth, the urban growth can help them. So as she was discussing about the food security also, this is the most important thing. The cultural shocks occur when they come from rural to urban areas. So I think that is also a very important thing to consider. But in the long run, in our cities also, there are women, they state back that long back they have come to the city, but their children, their girls are getting education. So that is the positive aspect also.
Dr. Rupini, in what way do you think health and population growth are interrelated?
If you will observe in any market or bazaar, some people still some are having the masks to avoid pollution. So what will happen if suppose overcrowded places are there? So that means population is denser, and then it is easier to get the airborne diseases. So for example, an increase in the antimicrobial resistance, it is also there. So we cannot have the resistance for all microbes as well as the viruses. For example, tuberculosis is there, malaria, cholera, and then nowadays frequent fever, there is a dengue fever. So our population results in the polluted water supplies also. People die each year because of the contaminated water related diseases, especially in the rural areas. For example, if more people are there, then we have to have the fresh air also at the same ratio, but it is not like that. So with the increasing number of people traveling by their vehicles, and then vehicular pollution is also there, and the toxic content in the air impacts on our kids also as well as aged people, and then especially the problems like the asthma, lung cancer, chest pain, congestion, as well as the those who are working in the factories, they are also having the throat inflammation, so cardiovascular diseases as well as the respiratory tract infections. So all these are also coming, and it is also depletion of the ozone layer because of the pollution, over pollution. So we all know that ozone layer is depleted, and then directly we are exposing to the UV radiation. If once it is UV radiation is directly it is touching us, then we can have the skin cancers. That is a premature aging also, we can say that. And also we have the eye related problems, that is a cataract as well as even blindness also occurs. So that's why we have to take the more and more caution also because of this overpopulation. So the problem of overpopulation can also be solved by spreading the awareness about the family planning and education about the overpopulation, as well as the enacting some birth control measures, as well as the government policies, law. So all these things are some of the measures from the government side also we can take care.
Yes. So population, instead of taking a top-down approach, a bottom-up approach is to be taken. The dignity of human life, as Dr. Rupini just now, she was mentioning about the family planning measures and birth control, these things. Today we also discuss about population stabilization. It's not population control. So we don't have to control the curb population, and most importantly, we have to give people the choices. The measures of birth control, the importance of having small family. There is about 225 million women in the world, and this is also a myth. Poor people have more children. It is so because the women do not have any means of contraception. We have adolescent pregnancies in our country. We have still early marriages. The children are still considered as an insurance policies. Poor people tend to have more children. Now, unless and until we address these issues, we will never be able to stabilize the population. The best contraceptive, if it is to be given, and that is the development, we provide means of livelihood. And if we say that population is a bomb, then it is the women only who can defuse that bomb.
And it's now time for us to wrap up this session. It is a burning topic these days, and unless and until we know why population is increasing and what are the consequences that we might face in future, we won't be able to educate ourselves and update ourselves about the dangers of the same. So I thank our experts.
You are listening to a program titled Increase in Population. Where are we heading? The participants of the program were Dr. B. Rupini, Associate Professor, and Dr. Deeksha Dave, Assistant Professor, School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies, IGNO. Anchored by Harpreet, technically supported by Archana, program produced by Reena Boro, and edited by Gauri Joshi. This was an EMPC IGNO presentation.